talk about the greatest presidents in American history, one name comes up almost every single time. George Washington. The founding father. The first president. The man whose face is printed on the dollar bill, carved into Mount Rushmore, and hung in classrooms across America. But there is a side of George Washington that history books mention briefly, and then move past as quickly as possible. Because George Washington, the man celebrated as a symbol of freedom and democracy, owned human beings for his entire adult life. And the full story of that is far darker than most people know. George Washington received his first enslaved person at the age of 11. 11 years old. A child himself, and already a slave owner. His father had died, leaving him a portion of the family estate. That inheritance included 10 enslaved African people. Washington didn't question it. He didn't refuse it. It was simply the world he had been born into, and he accepted it completely. By the time he was in his 20s, he was actively purchasing more enslaved people to work his plantation at Mount Vernon, Virginia. By the time of the American Revolution, the war fought under the banner of liberty, freedom, and the rights of all men. George Washington owned over 100 enslaved people. He wrote letters during that period about the importance of human freedom. He gave speeches about the God-given rights of every man. And then he went home to Mount Vernon, where over 100 human beings were held in bondage, forced to work his land, cook his food, build his buildings, and make him wealthy. The contradiction was not lost on everyone at the time. Some of Washington's contemporaries pointed it out directly. But Washington never publicly acknowledged it. He never expressed guilt about it in any letter or diary entry that historians have found. He simply continued. By the end of his life, the number of enslaved people at Mount Vernon had grown to 317. But here is the number that most history books leave out. When you include the enslaved people that Washington controlled through his marriage to Martha, people who technically belonged to the Custis estate but lived and worked under Washington's authority, the true number rises to over 600 human beings. Over 600 people. Fathers, mothers, children, grandparents, all of them living under the complete control of one man. Their lives at Mount Vernon were not what you might imagine when you picture an 18th century plantation. Washington was considered by some standards of the time to be a relatively organized enslaver, which is a phrase that reveals just how normalized this horror had become. But the records tell a different story. Enslaved people at Mount Vernon worked 6 days a week from sunrise to sunset. They lived in small, overcrowded cabins with dirt floors. They were given minimal food rations. If they didn't meet their work quotas, they were punished. Washington himself kept detailed records of the enslaved people on his property, their names, their ages, their work assignments. He tracked them the way a businessman tracks inventory. Because to him, and to the law of the time, that is exactly what they were. But among all the stories buried inside the history of Mount Vernon, one stands out above the rest. Her name was Ona Judge. Ona Judge was an enslaved woman who worked as a personal attendant to Martha Washington. She traveled with the family. She worked inside the presidential household. She was, by all accounts, trusted and skilled. And in 1796, she ran. Pause? Ona Judge escaped from the Washington household in Philadelphia and made her way to New Hampshire, where she built a new life for herself. She married a free sailor. She had children. She learned to read. When George Washington found out, he was furious. This is the part of the story that reveals everything about the man behind the monument. Washington, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, personally directed his agents to locate Ona Judge and bring her back. He wrote letters about it. He sent people to negotiate with her. He tried to have her seized and returned to slavery. His justification? That allowing her to escape without consequence would set a bad example for his other enslaved workers. Quiet, heavy tone. Ona Judge refused every offer. She was eventually interviewed by an abolitionist newspaper in her old age and said, directly, that she would rather have her freedom than all the comfort the Washington household could provide. She was never captured. She died a free woman in 1848. George Washington died in 1799. In his will, he arranged for the enslaved people he personally owned, not the Custis estate slaves, just his own, to be freed after Martha's death. Martha freed them early, in 1801, reportedly because she was afraid they might hasten her death to gain their freedom sooner. The over 150 Custis estate slaves had no such provision. They were inherited by Martha's grandchildren and remained in bondage. So what do we do with this? George Washington was, by many measures, a genuinely remarkable leader. He held together a fragile new nation. He voluntarily gave up power when he could have held it for life. He set precedents that shaped American democracy for centuries. Those things are real. But so is this. He owned over 600 human beings. He pursued a woman who escaped to freedom with the full force of his presidential authority. He built much of his wealth and comfort on the unpaid, forced labor of people who had no choice. And for most of American history, that part of the story was quietly set aside. Mentioned in a footnote. Softened with phrases like product of his time or complex legacy. But the people he enslaved didn't get the luxury of being a product of their time. They just lived it. History is never just one story. It is always many stories happening at the same time, and for most of recorded history, only one version was considered worth telling. George Washington's face is on the dollar. His name is on the capital city. His statue stands in dozens of countries around the world. Owner Judge's name was almost lost entirely. We found it. And now you know it. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the real version, the full version, the one they left out of the textbooks, then subscribe. Because every week, we're going to dig up another story that was buried on purpose. The truth doesn't disappear. It just waits.